Protesters are now calling to defund the police, as some Democratic officials appear to be jumping on board with that. You're watching Outnumbered Overtime now. I'm Harris Faulkner. With more protests across America and a tense night in New York City where police confronted demonstrators using batons just last night, making numerous arrests for violating curfew and all of that, protesters are now demanding officials cut funding for police nationwide and redirect some of the money toward minority communities. And San Francisco's mayor joining the Los Angeles mayor and announcing such plans to cut police funds and redirect them to communities of color. And some Minneapolis City Council members are pledging to dismantle the police departments in their area, ahead of an emergency meeting today on police reforms in the wake of George Floyd's death. Meanwhile, President Trump tweeted this: "The radical left Democrats' new theme is defund the police. Remember that when you don't want crime, especially against you and your family, I am the complete opposite. More money for law enforcement, law and order." Joe Gamaldi is the National Vice President of the Fraternal Order of Police. He's also president of the Houston Police Officers Union. Good to see you, Joe. Haven't seen you since our town hall. Great to have you on board this afternoon. First of all, I want to get your top-line reaction to what's happening right now with this call to defund police.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This is a radical idea, and frankly, it's insane to talk about defunding the police. And I know it makes for a popular hashtag on Twitter, and all the virtue signaling politicians and Hollywood elites will say, oh yeah, let's just go ahead and defund the police. But what does that actually look like? And I think you're seeing it right now. There's lawlessness in the streets. Innocent citizens are being assaulted out there during these protests. And I think you're seeing the consequences of defunding police for the last few years. In every major city, we are short police officers. They've made it a point to not staff us to the point that we need to be. And now violent crime is up in almost every major city. Just right here in our hometown in Houston, murders are up 48%. Aggravated assaults are up 22%. Our response times continue to skyrocket. And now you're going to defund the police? What sense does that make? And I'll tell you, from the people that I speak with in the community, they don't want less police officers, they want more.
Joe, let me ask you this, because, you know, at this moment in history, there's a lot of talk, and you're seeing the economic rebound a little bit that we're making today. And I say a little because we got to see in the long run and factor in all of the businesses, unfortunately, that have been damaged and the violence that we've seen among some and looting that we've seen with the George Floyd reaction. We have to factor all that in. But meanwhile, just looking at the protective services that police have been called to do versus some of the things that we have seen them do, like up in Buffalo, New York, where things have taken a turn, and we could see all that video of them going after one particularly elder gentleman. Does the money necessarily get the conversations flowing that need to happen, because you know you have some among your police departments that you need to look at?
Well, yeah, I think we absolutely need to have all of these conversations. What happened in Minneapolis was abhorrent, and we all need to be talking with our communities. We need to be listening right now, and we need to see, can we come together on a few different issues? Because, listen, we can all agree that what happened in Minneapolis was wrong, right? And we can all agree that, for the most part, police officers are doing a fantastic job. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. But we can also agree that there needs to be some reforms, like a nationwide de-escalation training for officers. And that's something that we can get behind. But we all need to be at the table, and we all need to be having this discussion together.
I wrote that down. That is really interesting, where you are coming together. And I know, as vice president of the FOP nationally, you want to be at the table when these decisions are made. So now I toss you a little bit into the politics of all of that. Are Democrats reaching out and saying, hey, we're thinking about taking $150 million away from the LAPD. You want to come sit at the table and talk? Like, what is the conversation like?
Well, you know, I think when people don't even consult with us before making decisions like that or putting things out, and most recently here in the city of Houston, we have people saying, you need to ban chokeholds. Well, we've never even had chokeholds here. So I think in situations like this, emotions run high. Everyone needs to take a breath. Let's figure out some solutions. But defunding the police department when violent crime is already through the roof is not the answer. The only people that are going to suffer are the hardworking, law-abiding people of our community. I'm sure the criminals will be celebrating when we cut funding and we cut police officers on the street. But let's have these conversations. Let's sit down and talk about it. Let's not immediately jump to conclusions that we need to defund police officers. It's completely ridiculous.
It is an interesting point that you're making, too, and many communities of color are right where you would have some of the highest needs for police presence. So more talk, definitely. Meanwhile, police groups are reportedly breaking with Joe Biden over his perceived failure to support them during the protests. One top police union official has said to Politico, clearly he's made a lot of changes the way candidates do during the primary process, but he kept moving left and fell off the deep end. Police are shaking their heads because he used to be a stand-up guy who backed law enforcement. Joe?
Well, you know, I think in this country, we're also concerned about putting everybody into their box, and you have to fit into these little boxes. Where I think most of Americans, or at least most of the Americans I talk to, we all kind of live our lives in the middle. And I think what happens and what Vice President Biden needs to remember is, in situations like this, we all need to come together to have a discussion. We don't have to denigrate every single police officer for the actions of a few, just like we don't need to denigrate the actions of protesters just by the actions of a small group of rioters. These things can coexist at the same time. We can talk about reforms without having to throw police officers under the bus, and we can talk about protesters having their right to do it and police officers protecting their right to do it without having to throw them all in with the violent rioters that have destroyed our cities.
Joe, before I have to let you go, and ironically, Joe Biden is getting ready to speak in Dover, Delaware. Wonder if he's going to talk about any of this. I do want my team to put up on the screen. It was according to The Appeal, is the source. A growing number of Democratic New York lawmakers have pledged to reject campaign donations from law enforcement. California Democratic State Senator Scott Wiener also pledged the same. That is shocking. There it is. There's The Appeal. What's your response?
Well, I'm a little disturbed when somebody doesn't even want to sit down at the table and have a conversation with law enforcement or even look for our endorsement. But as I've said numerous times, we need to come together. And when you have people like the Major City Chiefs Association and our chief right here in Houston putting out letters blaming law enforcement labor for all of the ills in law enforcement, well, that just doesn't hold up, because police chiefs do background investigations, they hire, they train, they set policy, they also discipline, and they fire officers. So they should probably look in the mirror a little bit harder before they start casting stones, and it's not productive. Let's everybody sit down at the table. To the community, we hear you, and let's try to work on some solutions together.
Yeah. I would add to that list, they're also dealing with an incredible burgeoning number of homeless in this country, particularly on the West Coast. Just an incredible amount of work that we're asking of our officers as well with regard to even just that one issue. Joe Gamaldi, the National Vice President of Fraternal Order of Police, good to see you today. Thank you for being on the program.